We need to talk more about Justus Ross-Simmons and Clarence Lewis because these two players might just be starters for Syracuse football this upcoming season.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going over a couple players who, quite frankly, we're not talking enough about. That's right, Justus Ross-Simmons, the Colorado State transfer wide receiver, and Notre Dame transfer cornerback, Clarence Lewis. And then later on in the show, unfortunately, another injury to discuss, and that is Marcus Washington in the defensive back room. So we're going to go over the impact of the injury for the DBs of Syracuse. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. When we are talking about the Syracuse football depth chart, and we're talking about all the weapons that this team has, there is one player that is consistently being overlooked by everyone, and that's including myself as well. So that's why this segment is going to be about this guy, and that is Justus Ross-Simmons. He is 6'3", 205 pounds. He's a wide receiver with 2 years of college eligibility left. He is a 3-star Colorado State transfer, and he's been pretty productive in his 2 seasons in college football so far. In his true freshman year, Justus Ross-Simmons, first of all, made the lineup, made the team, obviously. He had 26 catches for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns in 12 games as a true freshman at Colorado State. Now, when you play as a true freshman, you want to see that increased development, and that is exactly what happened with Ross-Simmons, as in 2023, which was last year, he had 45 catches, so nearly double, for over 700 yards, also 3 touchdowns in 12 games. So he took a significant leap forward from his true freshman season into his sophomore season. So you look at that upward trajectory like that, pretty good for Justus Ross-Simmons, and that culminated into a Mountain West honorable mention team for the wide receiver last year. Now, he did transfer to Syracuse a little bit late. It was on April 24th where he announced his decision, which was after the spring game. So we never got a public chance for him to actually see him and play. And there were a lot of schools that were after this kid, a lot of them in the transfer portal. I know he was a 3-star, but his second choice was the University of Florida. That's an SEC program. I know they might not necessarily be good this year, but still, that's an SEC program that has historically been pretty good. And then his other choices, or other schools that actually reached out to him, Penn State, Alabama, and Florida State. Those schools are telling you what they think of him. Obviously, if they're reaching out to him, they think that he's good enough to play. Maybe he doesn't start on all of those teams, but they certainly thought that he was good enough to play. And once again, those schools are Penn State, Alabama, FSU, and his second choice was Florida. He ultimately decided to go to Syracuse. When you watch Ross-Simmons and you watch his highlights, he is very, very good. For someone that's a big body wide receiver, he's really good at working underneath. It's almost effortless with Justus Ross-Simmons. There are so many highlights of him running across the line of scrimmage, but he almost looks like he's jogging the route, but he somehow is creating separation. And when I say jogging, it only appears to be that way. I'm not doubting like his effort or anything like that. The point is it looks effortless and he gets open. Not only that, when he actually catches the ball, his ability to turn up the field and beat defensive backs down the sideline, he's got underrated speed. There's a highlight, or there's multiple highlights, but one that I pointed out when I was preparing for this show, where he was going against Colorado, obviously a Power 5 team, catches the ball at the line of scrimmage, running a crossing route, and he beats two defensive backs to the sideline for a 15-yard gain. Once again, he catches it at the line of scrimmage, okay? Not 10 yards, not 15 yards, not 20 yards down the field. He catches it at the line of scrimmage and outraces two Colorado defensive backs to the sideline and picks up 15 yards. This guy's got great speed and he can work underneath, but also he can burn you over the top as well. There's a clip of him having like a 70-yard bomb against, I want to say it was Army. I think that was the clip, or maybe it was Air Force. It was one of those teams where he had a monster touchdown. He's a really, really good player. And you guys are going to think I'm crazy when I give you this comparison because it's just the ideal prototype. But when I watched his highlights, he looked a little bit like Deebo Samuel. Now, is he as good as Deebo Samuel? No. Deebo Samuel is one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. Justus Ross-Simmons is not on that level, but he plays kind of like him. When you think of Deebo Samuel, you think of a big, physical wide receiver. Actually, Samuel's not all that big. Justus Ross-Simmons is bigger at 6'3". Deebo's only 6 foot. But just a tough, big dude that can break a lot of tackles. That's kind of how Justus Ross-Simmons plays like. With that underrated speed as well. Like when he gets behind you, you're not catching him. So take that for what it's worth. Kind of a similar prototype when I watch him play. And like I said at the top, we talk a lot about the other skilled players in this team. Oronde Gadsden, of course he's going to get a lot of attention. LaQuinn Allen's going to get a lot of attention, right? Dan Villari even gets a lot of attention. And Zeed Haynes is someone who I have been praising ever since they got him. That I love his potential. I love his upside, and I think he's the wide receiver number one on this team. And we talk also a lot about Jackson Meeks, the other Georgia transfer wide receiver. The player that we don't talk about enough is Colorado State wide receiver Justus Ross-Simmons and what role he's going to play. And I'm going to answer that question right now. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 2. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 2 right behind Zeed Haynes. And at max, the floor, I think is wide receiver 3 for Ross-Simmons. This is a talented wide receiver that needs to get the ball in his hands. Does he lead all wide receivers in catches? That's possible. Because I think that Zeed Haynes is going to lead the team in yards because of his explosive playability and his ability to burn defenses down the field. But Ross-Simmons is more underneath. So I think that he might lead all wide receivers in catches. I'm not including Oronde Gadsden. I think he's listed as a tight end. So he's going to lead all the tight ends in catches and probably leads the team in catches. If I had to do in order, I would say Gadsden is number 1 in leading the whole team in catches. Ross-Simmons is in second on the team, first on wide receivers, and third is Zeed Haynes. But Zeed Haynes might catch less passes, but lead the team in yards. Does that make sense? But overall, Justus Ross-Simmons is a name to really look out for Syracuse football, and I'm excited to see him play in 11 days. We're just 11 days away from Syracuse in Ohio in the first week of the Oranges season and what could be a really, really special year. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about another player on the defensive side of the ball that deserves a little bit more love. I just love going to live sporting events, and it doesn't really matter what the sport is. I just love the energy in the building, and the way I get tickets for games is by using Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature is the curated deals. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if you're itching for football season like I am, well, Syracuse's odds for the first game against Ohio, according to FanDuel, well, the Orange are 17.5-point favorites to get the W. You think Syracuse can cover? Well, bet it right now on FanDuel. And if you want to play it just a little bit safer, Syracuse's money line is minus 950. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. College football is back, and the Locked On College Football Podcast kicks off the action with a live season preview at 7 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, August 20th on the Locked On College 24/7 streaming YouTube channel. This 4-part series covers each of the 4 major conferences with discussion on which ACC, Big 10, Big 12, and SEC teams have a shot at the expanded college football playoff, and I'm actually featured in the Locked On ACC preview, going over why Syracuse is a potential dark horse within the conference. So be sure to check out this special streaming on Locked On College's 24/7 YouTube channel or on Amazon Fire TV, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Let's now shift gears to the defensive side of the ball, and a name that we need to talk more about is Clarence Lewis. Clarence Lewis is a 5'11", 200-pound corner with just this year of eligibility left. He was picked up in the offseason. He was a 3-star transfer from Notre Dame, and this is someone who brings a lot of experience to Syracuse overall, like not just the defensive back room. Overall, he brings a ton of experience because over the last 4 years at Notre Dame, Clarence Lewis has played in 50 career games. In those 50 career games, he also has 3 interceptions and has a defensive touchdown as well on his resume, which came this past year against Tennessee State. Now, at Notre Dame, his playing time was gradually reduced. He started as a true freshman in 2020 in the college football playoff against Alabama. The following season, he played a lot. He had 53 total tackles. But from then on, his playing time decreased while at Notre Dame. But he was still a great teammate who worked really, really hard to at least stay a scholarship athlete at the very least. But he was a solid contributor within the locker room, as one of his cornerback teammates in Jaden Mickey said, quote, "He's always been like a big brother to us. He showed us what it was to work from when we first came in. He is probably one of the hardest workers I've ever been around." And then he went on to say that we're going to miss having him out there and being around the team, but he has to do what's best for him. And he's obviously, what that quote signals is that at minimum, Clarence Lewis is someone who is experienced and is a great teammate. But really the main reason that we're talking about him right now, because that was all just a setup, is the fact that he might be one of the top 2 corners on the team, which means he might be starting in 11 days. We don't have an official depth chart yet, but the way it might be trending is Clarence Lewis starting on one end with Devin Grant, the Buffalo transfer, on the other, followed by Jaden Bellamy and Marcellus Barnes as cornerback 3 and cornerback 4. So we better get used to Clarence Lewis because he could be one of the starting corners for this team. He needs to be talked about a little bit more. Like I said, he brings a ton of experience, not just to the defensive back room, but to the entire team. But let's talk about the secondary and why it's better for this upcoming season and why Clarence Lewis contributes to that. Think about the experience on the roster, or just in the secondary, okay? You got Justin Barron, a returning senior with nearly 50 games played under his belt, who was an ACC honorable mention last year. So I would consider him a pretty experienced college player. Elijah Clark, a safety, returning senior with over 30 games played. Deuce Chestnut, a corner or safety, but he's going to play corner this upcoming season. A redshirt junior with 28 games played and is also a two-time All-ACC player. And now you also have Clarence Lewis, who has played in 50 career college games. I know I've talked a lot about Jaden Bellamy being a breakout candidate for this team, and I spoke about how Marcellus Barnes is a pleasant surprise because he is a true freshman. It doesn't hurt to learn from a guy like Clarence Lewis, who has played at Notre Dame for the past 4 seasons. Notre Dame is one of the premier college football programs in the country. It is. Now, I don't remember the last time they won a national championship, but year in and year out, they're always in the top 25. Always. It doesn't hurt to be able to learn from a guy like Clarence Lewis. And for someone with only 1 year of eligibility left, it's going to be really valuable to learn from him because he's not going to be here for very long. And hopefully guys like Jaden Bellamy and guys like Marcellus Barnes could kind of take a thing or two from a guy like Clarence Lewis so that they are ready, assuming they're not ready in 2024, that they are ready to start in 2025. Clarence Lewis, in my mind, is a solid cornerback addition. I was excited when they got him. I said at minimum, he's someone who can provide experience and provides good depth. But hey, he might just be a starting corner for this team, so he deserves a lot of love. Once again on this episode, we're going over 2 players who need to be talked about more. We went over Justus Ross-Simmons and how he could be a starting wide receiver for this team. And now we're going over Clarence Lewis. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Another player or another couple of players you think need to be talked about more, because these 2 guys in Justus Ross-Simmons and Clarence Lewis could be starters in just 11 days, and they need a little bit more coverage. Both of them have a lot of experience. Both of them have been productive. I have high hopes for this season for Syracuse, in part because these 2 additions. Now, coming up, a little bit of a sour note. We'll go over the defensive back room a little bit more, but there was an injury to Marcus Washington, so we'll go over that next. Sandals, sunscreen, snacks for the kids. What do these have in common? You're probably buying a ton again this summer, but don't stress about the cost. Use Ibotta and get cash back on all of your purchases when you stock up on all of your summer essentials. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, the flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. So we've gone over a couple of players who needed to be talked about a little bit more in Justus Ross-Simmons and Clarence Lewis. But now on a little bit of a sour note, we have some injury news over at fall camp, and that was to Marcus Washington, a former Georgia and Louisville corner who transferred to Syracuse this offseason. I believe it was after the spring game, so we didn't get to see him. He unfortunately has gone down with a torn bicep, and Coach Fran recently said after a practice that he may come back later in the season, that it's not necessarily a season-ending injury, but it's going to at least take a few months to recover from the torn bicep. Now, Marcus Washington was once a 4-star Georgia recruit in 2022. I believe he was recruited actually by Fran Brown. He transferred to Louisville in 2023. He played in all 14 games for the Cardinals last season, but He didn't receive many snaps on defense. In fact, he only got 4 total snaps on defense the entire season for Louisville. So he came over to Syracuse under Fran Brown, where he redshirted in 2022. Once again, a redshirt means that you don't lose an extra year of eligibility, but you don't play that season. Washington, by all accounts, was having a solid camp for Syracuse and was mostly running with the twos. But unfortunately, he goes down with a torn bicep. And it's obviously just a bummer. Anytime there's an injury like there was to Braylon Ingram, you feel for the kid. Obviously, it's a tough recovery, and you just want him back on the field. You want him back happy and healthy. So we wish Marcus Washington nothing but the best in his recovery, and hopefully we can see him on the field soon for this team. As far as what it does to the depth chart in the defensive back room, now Marcus Washington was projected to be, once again, more of a reserve corner, more of someone who was a kind of like a reclamation project, if you will, a former top talent in high school, hasn't really lived up to the potential yet. But hey, under maybe the tutelage of Fran Brown, who's one of the best defensive backs coach in the country, he can get better. And he was having a good camp. He just goes down with the injury. As far as the depth chart, like I said, the top 4 don't change. The top 4 corners on this team, they do not change. Those being the aforementioned Clarence Lewis, who I spoke about earlier in the podcast, Devin Grant, a Buffalo transfer who was an all-MAC player last season, albeit as a safety. Marcellus Barnes, who we've talked about at length, especially on yesterday's podcast, going over some of the surprises at camp, a 4-star prospect who might just see the field his true freshman season. And of course, Jaden Bellamy, who I referred to as someone who could be a breakout candidate for this team, considering that he started half the year and he played pretty well in those games that he started. Those 4 remain unchanged. They weren't going to change with or without an injury to Marcus Washington. However, when there are injuries, it's an opportunity for guys to step up. That's the bottom line. That's the nature of the business. That's the nature of the beast. So guys like Greg Delane, Jaden Gould, all those defensive backs who are in competition with Marcus Washington, they now have a chance to see maybe a little bit more reps and perhaps get better, quite frankly. Just get better. And obviously there's the classic Wally Pipp, right? Where a player gets injured, Wally Pipp gets injured or something. I believe it was Lou Gehrig who took his spot, and obviously you never heard of Wally Pipp again. I'm probably butchering the story, but Yankees fans and baseball fans definitely know it. You get the idea. But that's kind of the point of what happens when there is an injury. It's an opportunity for other players to step up. Just like when Braylon Ingram went down the defensive line room, that opens the door for someone else to take over his role. And hopefully they can do an admirable job. It just sucks because, once again, I said it on the podcast, I hate injuries. Unfortunately, it's a reality, but I hate them. And a torn bicep is sucky. It's going to be a few months. Hopefully we see him back on the field this upcoming season. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football Podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. So we went over 2 players on this podcast who, quite frankly, we needed to talk about more. So I decided to give them each a segment, and that is Justus Ross-Simmons, the Colorado State transfer. Maybe he's a wide receiver 2 on this team. Clarence Lewis could be a starting corner from this team, the Notre Dame transfer. And of course, the unfortunate news out of camp that Marcus Washington, the cornerback transfer from Louisville, goes down with a torn bicep. So that is it for this episode as far as future plans. Well, on Wednesday, we have another guest, and that is, once again, Mike McAllister coming on the podcast to talk more about what's going on in fall camp, who's maybe standing out, who's maybe sliding down the depth chart, which true freshmen are going to have the most impact in 2024, the expectations for the season. And of course, I'm going to ask Mike McAllister his record prediction. And also, you can kind of treat this as the precursor to what is going to happen this Friday, when the Poll Friday question for this week was, which freshman will make the most impact? I'm going to ask Mike McAllister, so maybe that'll influence how you vote, which, by the way, you can vote at LO_Syracuse is the Twitter, and you can also go to the YouTube community section where you'll see the question posted. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And folks, Syracuse football season is just 11 days away. Pretty soon, it's going to be game week.